It is time now to take a look back at this week's headline-making stories in our Reporters Rewind. Our guests at the roundtable today are ZACK BADDORF. He's a freelance broadcast journalist whose work includes some reporting for Rise News from eastern Ukraine. He did a great work there. As well, we have EKUA BREW-HAMMOND. She is a style and culture writer whose work has appeared in Ebony, Parenting, and Jet magazine, and freelance journalist Joel STRAUSS, who writes frequently about the Middle East and has lived in Israel. Welcome to all of you. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Good to see you in the U.S., Zach. Thanks for coming in.
Me.
Yeah, glad you've been safe and come back. So a lot to talk about, and let's see, where do I want to start? I think, Zach, since you come the farthest, let's start with Ukraine and everything that is happening there. Gosh, what part of this do we want to parse out first? From your reporting, from being there, give us a little bit of the insight of what's happening, perhaps, that we don't get to see the full spectrum of.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the rebels are really a ragtag group. And the reason that Russia is pushing forward, providing arms, providing special forces, providing all that sort of military support that's coming in, is because they know they're going to lose if they're on their own. And so the Russians are taking advantage of the situation, they're creating instability, and they're going to continue to do that. And I think that creates a very difficult situation. And it makes Europe and it makes the United States look awful because they're doing nothing in response. I think it's a demonstration of a total lack of foreign policy by the Obama administration. I was about to say Bush administration. I mean, both have been really pathetic. Germany is worried about its natural gas. France is concerned about the military weapons it's supplying to Russia, and Britain with the financial ties with Russia. They're all distracted by economic concerns, and they're not caring about the people of Ukraine.
And that's what I wanted to follow up with you on that in terms of, you said it makes the U.S. look bad, but shouldn't it be those EU members that are leading the charge? The U.S. Sanctions, a matter of fact, are more stringent than the EU sanctions.
Right. And one way or the other, the U.S. and the EU need to support their ally, which is Ukraine. The Ukrainian people are suffering here, and they're being invaded. And it's just not fair that we sit back on the sidelines.
And then, Angel, I'm going to bring you in this bit. I just want to take advantage of having Zach here in the studio. Let me ask you one other question. It seems ridiculous to many Americans that Putin is denying involvement in this conflict when there seems to be a mountain of evidence growing against him. How does it seem to the Ukrainian people, these denials?
Well, I mean, I was in Crimea when these they called them little green men, were on the streets with no insignia, no badges saying they were from Russia. They were obviously from Russia. They had armored personnel carriers on the streets. So to deny that they're there is just silly. And to be fair, that region is very split. And the Ukrainian government has been shelling some of these rebel-held areas, and they have not done a very good job of preventing civilian casualties, which engenders the people of this area toward Russia even more. So there's a little bit of back and forth, and there is definitely some support for the rebels in those areas, but it's, to invade a foreign country requires some sort of retribution by the international community.
All right, I better bring in the other reporters before they get up and storm out. Joel, let me hop over to you. Your perspective about this conflict?
I would think that the situation for Russia is not a great one either, and I think it's a whole lot worse probably than the U.S. or almost anyone else involved besides the Ukraine, because if you look at it today, the Russian currency is at an 11-year low versus the U.S. dollar. It seems like they're in economic free fall. They had almost no investment in July, so it seems like there's been a real economic impact, number one. And number two, what is he getting with this invasion? Because now you're talking about more of a NATO presence all around Russia. I mean, what is he getting out of it? That's my question.
Yeah. So your thoughts, Nene?
I'm just sort of interested in sort of all of the different politics that I see at work, because I feel like in some ways, Obama is being blamed for not taking a harder attack, but at the same time, I don't know how much more he can do, because I feel like people are sort of pushing him to kind of put some boots on the ground, but I don't think we have the money to do that at this point, frankly. And then we have an election, a midterm election coming up. So I think there's a lot of sort of dancing around what's happening. And I mean,
yeah, and he said very specifically, even his press briefing yesterday, that there would be no troops on the ground. There'd be no military involvement there in Ukraine. I see you holding your lips together. What did you want to say?
Ukrainians have no interest in troops on the ground, and I certainly hope we don't. As a former military person, I'm a veteran, I would not want military troops there either. Same with Syria. Syrians have no interest in U.S. troops being on the ground. They can do it by themselves. They can fight against ISIS. They can fight against the regime on their own. They just need support. They need military arms that they can use to defend themselves.
Yeah, it seems like at this point they need a lot of support because ISIS really has made a definitive, well, they've been making a definitive charge through Syria and now, of course, on into Iraq. Let me turn the corner and talk about another big topic in the headlines today, and that, of course, was this truce that was agreed to between Israel and Hamas. This is a big step forward, but do you think it is a lasting step forward? Joel, I'll start with you.
I think it'll last maybe for a year or two, and then you'll have something very similar to what just happened, where a bunch of rockets are fired or some other provocation, and then Israel responds and a bunch more people die. So I think the only lasting solution is going to be one in which Fatah and Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, go into Gaza and they control both Gaza and the West Bank. The real question is, how do they do that? Do you do it through some sort of military intervention with Israel's help? If so, how do they not look like they're, doing Israel's dirty work? Or do you do it through an agreement? And if so, how?
And does that not seem to you, Joel, to be the next bone of contention? Because there is now demands, now that they've reached this ceasefire, demands of giving back the West Bank, the control there. Do you think that then is the next front, if you will, to have to confront? Well,
I think it's difficult to say, but I think the main issue is how do you deal in the meantime? How much do you open up the ports? How much do you allow Gaza to flourish under Hamas? Because how much of that will be, used as a Hamas victory? Mm-hmm. So what sort of steps do you take in the meantime before Fatah comes back, hopefully, either militarily or through an agreement?
And the truth is, the U.S. is sort of between a rock and a hard place in this situation. Of course, we are a very strong and clear ally with Israel, but, knowing the reports of how some Palestinians are being treated, the settlements that are being built, it is very easy for some to then sympathize and have a little, if you will, ire against Israel. I see you nodding your head, Nene.
I mean, I don't have an ire against Israel, but I think that when you ask the question, can this ceasefire hold, I think right now it's sort of, there's an unfair sort of bargaining table. Israel holds all the cards, and they're the ones that are saying, you have to demilitarize, you have to do this, and they control movement in and out of Gaza. So I think until we get to a place where there are mediators involved that the people of Gaza feel that they can trust, that are working on their behalf as well, it's going to be difficult to see that peace lasts.
If I may, I want to move forward to our last topic before we run out of time, and that, of course, this is the whole issue of racial tensions, particularly between the African-American community and law enforcement, which was only brought to bear even more because of the Michael Brown shooting. And then I'm going to start with you for all the obvious and stereotypical reasons, because I'm brown, I can do that. And that is, where do we take this conversation now?
I've been asking myself that over the last couple of days and weeks. I feel like, 59 years after Emmett Till, we're still at a place where, a black man walks down the street and is deemed threatening and loses his life. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of things. What I was encouraged by, there's a group called Black Lives Matter that's actually doing sort of something in the spirit of the freedom rides of the 1960s that's going down this weekend to just sort of support Ferguson and just make that statement and say, we're done with this over-policing of blacks. So, I mean, I think that's a start, like just kind of coming together as a community and demanding change to this. And I think it's also good that Obama is looking into the fact that the local police departments are so heavily militarized, because they should not be in the position where, we're seeing those images of, an army basically against local citizens.
I want to ask both Zach and you, Joel, to give us this perspective, because it's hard for me as a brown person in this country. There are a lot of people, both in St. Louis and around the country, that think that this altercation between Mike Brown and Darren Wilson had nothing to do with race. So from a white person's perspective, explain to me that logic. Can you do it? Speak for all the white people. We have to speak for black people all the time.
I mean, that's pretty difficult, but I think it's because we see a system that works as white people. We see a system which we don't really encounter very often, because it is these, black communities, minority communities, which are policed much more often and arrested at much higher rates. So we don't really see the system in the same way. So we're not exposed to that, and that's why I think we hold it in such high regard.
Is that why it makes it so easy for a person who is not of color to think that this has nothing to do with race, and this is just another example of the African American community playing the race card?
Well, I don't think that, but I think what we do need to do is address it more systemically. I think this is not just an issue of this one particular incident in this one particular community. Obviously, there wasn't enough trust, and perhaps that's something that needs to be addressed at a larger issue, looking at the communities, the training, making sure that in African American communities that there is that trust between the police and the residents.
Yeah, going back to your point, Joel, there is a statistic that the citizens of Ferguson, Missouri, were arrested at a 4-time higher rate than the African Americans in Ferguson than the rest of the population. So there is a disparity there, and it makes it difficult to explain. Like 10 seconds.
Okay, yeah, I saw that, and I was just wondering, why aren't those police wearing cameras?
Yeah, and that is the big push. So if anything can move forward, Nene, you were talking about where do we go forward, perhaps that might be the next step forward. This has been a great conversation, but we're going to have to end it right here. Thank you, guys. Zack Baddorf, Nene, EKUA BREW-HAMMOND, and Joel Strauss. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And you're watching Arise America.